What are video games above all else? Power fantasies, of course, where from the comfort of our homes we can be transported to far-flung worlds and toy with the powers of gods. But at the same time, what is a game without some sort of challenge? We as players expect pushback from an increasingly difficult gallery of enemies, but sometimes developers decide to get a little more creative in how they make us run the gauntlet. For games where the player is cast into the role of an especially powerful or well-armed individual, there are few tropes more common than stripping the player of their godlike abilities or huge arsenal of weaponry. For a level or two, you're then forced to forge ahead with only bare bones gear, or perhaps even nothing at all. Though these levels certainly can be fun when they make the player get resourceful in a creative or clever way, often they're simply an excuse to throw up obnoxious brick walls in the player's face and pad out the game's playtime. That's certainly true for these video game levels, because no matter how visually impressive or intriguing they initially seemed to be, getting through them was ultimately a tedious, infuriating slog. I am Kirsten from WhatCulture, and these are 10 terrible video game levels that took away your powers. Number 10. Residue Processing. Half-Life. Half-Life's 9th chapter, Apprehension, ends with Gordon Freeman being knocked unconscious, stripped of all his weapons bar his trusty crowbar, and then dumped into an active trash compactor. After the player gingerly escapes certain doom at the very end of the level, they're left to complete the bulk of the next chapter, Residue Processing, without their precious array of weaponry. Mercifully, the player isn't forced into any awkward stealth-based encounters against enemies, but the level's focus on irritating platforming and traversal through a maze of conveyor belts makes it a section which most fans dread playing through. Thankfully, Residue Processing is only about 10 minutes long, but it sure as hell feels a good while longer as you're playing it. Number 9. Under the Knife. Prototype. Midway through Prototype, super-powered shapeshifter protagonist Alex Mercer is injected with a parasite which strips him of the vast majority of his powers, bar the ability to sprint and disguise himself. Starting with the mission Under the Knife, the player is forced to spend the next few levels using more conventional human weaponry, choosing their targets wisely, and where possible, sticking to stealth. For an open world game marketed on the player being able to live out their own superhero fantasies, it's a huge bummer that a 3-mission chunk of gameplay nerfs the protagonist so much, and the player's sense of fun as a result. On the flip side, when you do eventually get all your powers back, you'll also end up with a couple of snazzy new ones as a compensation for the time wasted. Number 8. Forsaken Fortress. The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker. The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker at least gets its worst section out of the way early on, with the second chapter catapulting Link to the infamous Forsaken Fortress. Link ends up losing his sword on the trip over to the fortress, and so the player is shoved into an infuriating mandatory stealth sequence where, if spotted, you're sent back to the very beginning. The level design is both confusing and tedious, and having your sword taken away at this point in the game is straight up annoying. But it's the lack of checkpointing which really makes so many fans hate this one. For newcomers to the series, it was an immediate turn-off, a bizarrely irritating opening which didn't get things off on the right foot at all. Number 7. Arsenal Gear, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty boasts an infamous sequence in which protagonist Raiden is captured, stripped naked, and tortured by Revolver Ocelot and Solidus Snake. At the end of the torture, Raiden is freed by Olga and instructed to search the bowels of Arsenal Gear in search of Solid Snake, though Olga apparently wasn't able to give him his gear back, or even his pants. For the next 10 minutes of the game, the player is half hilariously, half annoyingly made to traipse around Arsenal Gear in the nude. And because Raiden is using his hands to cup his, modesty, his attacks are also severely restricted. Number 6. Hollow Bastion, Kingdom Hearts. Close to the end of the original Kingdom Hearts, protagonist Sora arrives at Hollow Bastion and promptly has his trusty Keyblade taken away from him by Riku. Not only does this leave you with just a crappy wooden sword to make physical attacks, but Donald and Goofy also leave your party, per their oath to stay with whoever possesses the Keyblade, while Beast remains by your side. Though Hollow Bastion itself is one of Kingdom Hearts' most atmospheric worlds, it's also one of its most annoying, due to the high degree of difficulty, especially as it pertains to juggling enemies while platforming and puzzling. Without Beast at your side, Hollow Bastion would truly feel like Square Enix trolling us all. In the very least, it thankfully doesn't part you from your Keyblade for too long, but certainly long enough. Number 5. Mountain Fortress CASTLEVANIA Lords of Shadow. In Castlevania Lord of Shadow's Chapter 4 area, Mountain Fortress, the player will find themselves confronted by the mischievous Chupacabra, a deeply irritating little chimp which immediately steals all your magical items and skedaddles. Though you're still an able enough fighter without these accoutrements, your double jump and dash abilities are taken away, as well as, most crucially, your ability to heal. To get your wares back, you need to chase down the Chupacabra, which only requires a few minutes of backtracking, if you know where you're going. But if you don't, it's easy enough to get turned around and caught with your pants down in a battle against the nearby cave troll. Mercifully, the Chupacabra does give you your equipment back without incident once you catch up to him, though you'll likely just wonder why the developers sent you on this wild goose chase in the first place. Number 4. Episode 6 DEADMAN Death Stranding. At the start of Death Stranding's 6th episode, DEADMAN, a major hurdle is thrown into the player's way, as their BB unit malfunctions and it's taken away by DEADMAN for repairs. Given that BB is an extremely useful tool for detecting the game's near-invisible BT enemies, forging ahead without it makes Sam's job much tougher, even ignoring the fact that Episode 6 sends the player into the game's most treacherous terrain, the icy tundra. Though smart players can certainly mitigate BB's absence by laying down zip lines and traversing the land extra cautiously, it is the single chapter which, by social media accounts, caused many players to drop the game entirely. As joyous as Sam's reunion is with BB a few hours later, being stripped of the game's key tech for so long ultimately made Episode 6 an aggravating slog, and Hideo Kojima clearly couldn't have had it any other way. Number 3. Don't Look Down, Far Cry 4. It's actually a pretty common trope throughout the Far Cry series to periodically take away most of, if not all of the player's weapons, yet never more irritatingly than in Far Cry 4's Durgish prison level, Don't Look Down. In addition to being imprisoned and separated from all your gear, you're also hopped up on hallucinogenic drugs, because why the hell not? So you need to try and escape the prison without weapons, while also avoiding the hallucination of a masked tribal killer, who, believe it or not, will actually kill you if you're spotted. Getting killed throws you right back to the beginning, and even after you escape this section courtesy of a grappling hook, you have to navigate an outpost filled with guards and alarms, which can similarly lead to a quick death. It's without question the most widely loathed mission in the entire game, and a textbook example of a no-gear mission designed simply to piss you off. Number 2. Redemption, Final Fantasy XV. Final Fantasy XV's infamous 13th chapter, Redemption, is arguably one of the worst levels in any Final Fantasy game ever. The chapter starts with protagonist Noctis being stripped of the ability to summon weapons, which, in addition to being separated from his pals, makes him pretty much screwed. The only solace is that Noctis is equipped with the Ring of the Lucy, the limited power of which the player must use to disable enemies, navigate a seemingly endless series of hallways and doors in order to finally regain access to his powers. All in all, players are deprived of their abilities for almost 2 hours of agonisingly dull stealth gameplay and half-baked lo-fi combat. Fans actually complained enough that Square Enix eventually patched Final Fantasy XV to make the chapter easier and even allow players to bypass a major chunk of it. Number 1. Mission 11, Zone of the Enders. In Zone of the Enders' 11th chapter, the player is forced to ditch their trusty orbital frame deity and briefly take control of a raptor, one of the series' basic recurring enemies. Naturally, the raptors can't take much punishment at all, and to make matters worse, this unit is already on its last legs. As a result, the player has to press on as gingerly as possible, engaging enemies only when absolutely necessary, as frustratingly, it often is. Though this section thankfully doesn't last longer than about 10 minutes, it's one of the few challenging sequences in an otherwise extremely easy game, and worst of all, it's just not fun. The moment you regain control of deity though, absolute bliss. And that's our list of the 10 most terrible video game levels that took away your powers. Did you ever experience these in video games? If you did, leave us a comment down below and let us know. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button. But for now, I have been Kirsten from WhatCulture, and I will see you in the next video.